History is a story told by the survivors. But sometimes, it is a story told by those who had the power to write the books. For centuries, we have been told a singular narrative, that civilization was a sudden spark that ignited in the Nile Delta around 3100 BCE. We are taught that Egypt was a miracle, a culture that emerged from a vacuum of primitive nomads. But the sand is a poor keeper of secrets. Beneath the millions of tons of shifting silica lies a truth that challenges the very foundation of Western academia. Before there was a Memphis, before there was a Thebes, there was a power that spanned the continent. What if I told you that the Great Pyramids were not the beginning of African greatness, but its midpoint? What if the pharaohs were merely the inheritors of a legacy that had already flourished for 5,000 years in a place the world has forgotten? Tonight, we go beyond the first cataract. We go beyond the written word. We go back to the Green Sahara, to the Empire of the Sun, the civilization that taught the world how to reach for the stars. 7,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. It was the African humid period. Due to a tilt in the Earth's axis, monsoons traveled further north. This was a land of ghost rivers. The Wadi Hawa and the Yellow Nile waterways that stretched from the heart of the continent to the Mediterranean. Look at these paintings. They are not dreams. They are memories. These people lived in a world of abundance. But abundance creates a need for order. As the climate began to fluctuate, these Saharans didn't just survive, they organized. The empire we seek wasn't built of marble and steel. It was built of social cohesion and celestial knowledge. By 7000 BCE, while Europe was still in the grip of the Mesolithic, the people of the Sahara were domesticating cattle feet that required massive communal effort. They were the first cattle lords. This brings us to the most important site you've never heard of. Nubta Playa, located 100 miles south of modern-day Abu Simbel. Here, we find the world's oldest astronomical observatory. The stones are aligned to the summer solstice. They track the rising of Sirius and the belt of Orion. Why is this significant? Because these are the exact same celestial markers used by the later Egyptians to predict the flooding of the Nile and to align the Giza pyramids. The science of the pyramids was not invented in Egypt. It was brought to Egypt from the desert. The architects were already working in the Sahara 2,000 years before the first brick of Saqqara was laid. As the Sahara began to dry out around 5000 BCE, the people were forced toward the only remaining source of life, the Nile. But they didn't just settle anywhere. They gathered in the south, in the land of the ancestors. In the 1960s, a team from the University of Chicago, led by Keith Zepp and Bruce Williams, raced against time to excavate the site of Custal before it was submerged by the Aswan High Dam. What they found in Tomb L was a revelation that threatened the status quo of history. This incense burner dates to 3300 BCE. That is 300 years before the unification of Egypt under King Nile. Yet, here is the iconography of a pharaoh. The white crown of Upper Egypt. The falcon of Horus. The royal sepulchre. The conclusion was inescapable. Yet scholars fought it for decades. The institution of kingship, the very idea of a divine ruler, was a Nubian invention. This was the kingdom of Tasseti, the land of the bow. Tasseti was the proto-empire. It was a black African state that controlled the trade of gold, obsidian, and incense. They were the elder brothers. When we look at the splendor of Egypt, we are looking at the expansion of Tasseti. The cultural Big Bang happened in the south, among the dark-skinned peoples of the Upper Nile. If the evidence is so clear, why is this empire hidden? Why is Tasseti not taught alongside Rome or Greece? To answer that, we must look at the architects of modern history. Egyptology was born in the Victorian era time of intense colonial expansion and the pseudoscience of racial hierarchy. For the Western mind of 1880, it was psychologically impossible to believe that a civilization as grand as Egypt could be indigenous to Africa. They created the Hamitic hypothesis. They claimed that Egypt was founded by a lost race of Caucasians or light-skinned Libyans who brought civilization to the backward Africans. They literally de-Africanized the Nile. Even when the evidence pointed south, even when the earliest tombs in Egypt were identical to those in Nubia, they ignored it. They called Nubia a tributary. They called the Saharan astronomers primitives. They cut the head off of African history and placed it on a pedestal of Western imagination. By erasing the empire that came before Egypt, they made Egypt look like an anomaly, an accident. But Egypt was no accident. It was the deliberate, planned continuation of a 10,000-year-old African vision. The hidden empire didn't just disappear. It branched out. When the Sahara dried, people didn't just go to the Nile. They went west to the Niger River. They went south to the Great Lakes. We see the remnants of a hidden empire's mathematics in the fractal patterns of African architecture. We see their star mapping in the oral traditions of the Dogon, who knew of the invisible star Sirius B centuries before Western telescopes could see it. This is the Pan-African reality. The continent is not a collection of disconnected tribes. It is a web of a single, ancient civilization that was fractured by climate change and later by colonization. The hidden empire is the root system of the African tree. When we reclaim this history, we change the world's power dynamic. We move from a story of development to a story of interruption. Africa doesn't need to catch up to the world. The world is still trying to catch up to the spiritual and celestial harmony established by the cattle lords of Nabta, Playa, 9,000 years ago. There are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt. Let that sink in. The heartland of this ancient power is still there, waiting to be excavated. Only 2% of ancient Nubia has been explored. What other empires lie beneath the dunes of Chad? What cities are hidden under the canopy of the Congo? The hidden empire is calling to us. It asks us to stop looking at the world through the lens of the last 500 years